So I gave you a very pessimistic outlook on the current situation. There was a book called Too Late to Be Pessimistic. We are in this global crisis, which is accelerating. We saw huge forest fires everywhere in North America, in South Europe, in Siberia, in the north of Africa. We saw frightening forest fires. It's affecting millions and millions of people, and we're seeing that this is a real consequence of climate change. So what can we do now? What strategies should we have? First and foremost, let's talk about some principles for this strategy. What we need is the following. We need to emphasize structural changes that need to take place, which are symbolized in system change, not climate change, which is a good idea. But what does this mean? This means the way that we produce energy, the way in which transport is organized, habitats, housing, industrial production, all of these things must change, as well as fossil fuels, fossil resources, food production and agriculture, all these things are affected. I'm emphasizing agriculture as well because it's one of the so-called forgotten children in the fight against climate change in industrialized countries. So we have to have these structural changes. That way we maximize change. And all these decision-making authorities, we must break them down, and we can only do this by having mass action. Regarding energy, we have to nationalize the energy sector and not leave this to fall into the hands of the large multinational companies. We have to rethink our transport systems as well. We have to discuss privatization of land and housing. We have to have plans to improve housing for many people. We also need to ask ourselves fundamental questions on industrial production. What's behind the necessary structural changes is to eradicate the exorbitant power of capitalism as a system. It's to eradicate the idea that competition and profit are the only things that matter, and it's to install the idea that the common good must be above the value of exchanges, that is profit. So those are the structural changes that we need. This has a direct link with our eco-socialist perspective, of course. We must also put forward the fact that structural changes can't only be done on an individual basis. That's very important to consider. It's not just the individual. 2, we must also have a climate action for this transition towards a less dangerous future. So what does this mean? Nationalize or socialize the energy sector as well as the finance sector. It also means having development programs for transport, public transport everywhere. And electric cars is just a false hope. It's also fighting towards better agriculture, fighting against single crop-based agriculture, fighting against exploitation. This must be diversified and based on local consumption and production. Fighting against single crop productions and quick mass productions is also very important in our transition plan. So our plan of action, if we wait for capitalists to find a way of making profit, that will happen. They will find a way of making profit from this. All of these ideas that capitalists have to so-called save the planet is an illusion. It's just to make profit. This must be done at all levels possible, at a local level, regional level, national and international. There are many things that can be done on all of these levels. And it's not just one level that is important. Next, so for the climate movement, we must have an anti-capitalist impetus. This means that climate is always seen by some parts of the left as something that is linked to other injustices, but really climate is the central axis of the capitalist system. So if we really want to save the climate, then we will need to have anti-capitalist measures, and these measures must be based on social justice. We cannot involve people on a mass scale and worsen their living conditions and exacerbate inequalities. So it must be linked. Climate must be linked to social justice. We have to have, for example, good living conditions, free public transport, etc., etc. So this must be done as a priority. So we need structural changes, anti-capitalism. These are our main points for our strategy. We need a transition towards positive change. So all of this is, once again, very beautiful. They're just words, but it means that we really need to discuss these within the climate movement, within our groups, within our movements in the left, in the radical anti-capitalist left. Because often this radical anti-capitalist left has taken the climate issue as a sort of bonus and not as a central theme for the fight for justice for everyone on this earth. So it must play a more key role in our fight, in our struggles. I'm now going to give you some examples for climate action to fight against climate change. We are currently in the preparation of the next COP Glasgow, which will take place in November, and we need all the things possible to have mass campaigns around this campaign. We are not expecting anything great from this conference of parties in Glasgow. It's window dressing in a nutshell. It's very much ideological. It's very much struggles against between the different people in power, the different authorities, just like the other COPs. The majority of climate change summits don't really give us hope. From the summit in Rio, they have never really given us anything. Countries, companies, nothing has happened. It's all a load of rubbish. But it can be a time where we can have mass campaigns, where we can have actions. So from the smallest actions to reformist actions, and one with an anti-capitalist perspective, all of these can play a role and all of these can be important, because everything which questions the system, which challenges the system, is what is important and is what can really bring about change. So everything that is against growth, production, mass production, profit. So I'll give an example with public transport. If we want to get rid of, for example, cars, now cars are no longer seen as a luxury, they're seen as a cost, and we'd like to eliminate costs, of course. We see in Europe, in many European countries, a third of people don't have a car if they don't need to use it to go to work. They'll use public transport. So we're seeing this as a growing trend, and it's more and more possible with better public transport infrastructure. But if we really want to eliminate cars, we need to have a new structural change. We need to have better public transport, and we can fight for this in many different ways. For example, we can demand free transport, free public transport for young people, for unemployed people, retired people, pensioners. We can also have free transport, free public transport. This is the case already in Luxembourg. I know it's a very small state and it doesn't cost them much at all, so they're able to do it. But it's an example. The government is actually very proud of this. But in the end, free public transport must be our aim, linked to a plan that will make public transport have a wider reach. So what can we do? We can make cars obsolete in use, and also emphasize the fact that we need to convert car factories into factories that make trains, for example, train carriages, trams, buses, and so on. So we need to transform these into factories that produce public transport vehicles. This would be a great victory if we can do this in our regions, in our countries, etc. Some years ago, we made a campaign for this, for free public transport. It didn't last a long time, but it was very popular, and the majority of people were for free public transport. So this can be part of our activism, our activity, and can also have a boost from trade unions and workers' movements. Often this is forgotten, the aspect of consuming, consumerism. The quality aspect. So having consumers and the general public at large means that we're also having on board the trade unions, the workers' movement as well. And there are many examples of this, good examples in different countries. Now, with regards to energy, this is, of course, the base of electricity, of heating and transport. We absolutely must fight for renewable energy. These have many advantages. Once you've set up a solar panel or a wind farm, this gives electricity. You don't actually need to buy more resources. You don't need to buy more combustibles or fossil fuels or fuels. And the price of renewables is now competitive with fossil fuels. So we can use this as an argument, which is also given by the IIRE. So we can fight for more renewables at a local level, at a national level, at an international level. And of course, with social justice in mind and without those who are in power to be in power, of course. So setting up wind farms, for example, I know that there are many wind farms, but there are lots of, there's lots of resistance from the nuclear sector. Giscard d'Estaing was the person who nuclearized France. So there are lobbies that are not very well known often, that are against wind farms because they are pro-nuclear. In Belgium, the other example is that the traditional right and in Flanders are against new wind farms and renewables in general. So to fight against this, we need to have local activism, regional activism, who discuss about the place where we install solar panels, wind farms, so that this can be acceptable and fair for the population. So We must do this in a democratic way, have renewables. We must have a transparent system as well.
For instance, there are several cities in Belgium where you've got cooperatives managing solar panels or wind turbines for a local network of users. This can help accept and spread these new forms of energy. We need to we need to involve the users with a transparent price policy, and we need to involve also the workers of the renewable energy sectors. The democratic discussions on how to spread renewable energies is something which is really important to help spread them across the regions. Nowadays, renewable energies is mostly an initiative of green capitalism. Um, for example, shopping malls which install solar panels on their parking lots so as to get a green image and so on. But now imagine renovating houses with renewable energies and solar panels. This should also be an axis of our activities, as this is also an issue of social justice. A third example, so first was transportation, second one was renewable energies, and now a third example, international solidarity. You currently have in Brazil the Amazon forest being destroyed by Bolsonaro, and linked with that, you've got a kind of slow genocide of primary people, of indigenous people and climate activists and activists against multinationals and against monocultures and activists who struggle against soil production and so on. All this is linked with the struggle against the destruction of the Earth ecosystem, an ecosystem of which we all depend and of which the first people, the indigenous people, were the ones who helped us understand how important it is. So protesting this genocide of the First Nations is also an important element of our struggle to safeguard climate internationally. Another important aspect is solidarity with small peasants against agribusiness. In India, you've got poor small peasants being killed by pesticides. You've got a huge number of suicides of small peasants everywhere in the world. So small peasantry is in danger, is at risk under the weight of agribusiness and finance. And you can see those poor, poor small peasants everywhere in the world, also in Europe. Yeah, I got it. Thanks. And those small peasants are prisoners of bank loans, and when they can't repay their debts, their lands are being sold to big companies, mostly in order to sell meat and so on. So agriculture is one of the first fronts of the climate justice movement, in which you've got peasants working for their livelihoods. And their struggles should be an example within the whole climate movement for us to get healthy food again, against pesticides, for soils to be regenerated, and so on. You can't save nature by creating natural reserves. you've got to change agriculture in order for it to become a whole, an integral part of ecosystems. Last point is the struggle against mining projects and against land grabbing. Land grabbing continues, for example, in countries such as Indonesia or Malaysia, with projects becoming bigger and bigger, with lands being grabbed by multinationals. Then you've got all the mining projects linked with our use of mobile phones. You've got mining projects for our batteries as well as for wind turbines, wind engines. So there's a whole mining project linked with rare earth and so on which big multinationals, big corporations want to have a monopoly. And when you see the working conditions of workers, often child workers, in order to extract coltan, for example, in Congo, when you see child workers from Manchuria to Latin America, this is awful. All those mining projects must be fought against with all possible strengths. Then you've got the extraction of natural resources being caused by extreme poverty. If you think about gold digging in the rivers in tropical forests such as Amazon, where gold is being digged out by using mercury, which completely poisons the aquatic systems. So this is gold digging made by poor people because they have no other choice. So we must fight this by giving those poor people another perspective, another alternative, which would be a social and ecological one. Because it's because of their lack of perspectives and of their situation of extreme poverty that those people are forced to go and dig gold in the rivers. So all this is important in building a climate movement, climate justice movement. So transportation, renewable energies, international solidarity. And then you've got nuclear energy, which is still a field of struggle. Nuclear energy uh, um, is an absurd energy system. It could never be applied on the world level, on the whole world level. So you've got plans to expand nuclear plants uh, in countries where there are no democratic means to oppose them, such as in China. And even after such an event as Fukushima, you got strong pressure by lobbying groups to increase the part of the place of nuclear energy within what they call green energies, because they say that nuclear power plants do not emit CO2. Let me give an example of the small country where I live, Belgium. Soon there will be a vote in order to close down the remaining two nuclear power plants. They should be closed down by 2025. The government hesitated, but since nowadays even the nuclear sector does not foresee any uh, possibility of high enough profits, they are in favor of closing them down. But the government put down a condition. They said that uh, the the electricity production should not decrease when we close down those energies. This would be completely feasible through renewable energies. but the Minister for Energy said that this is not possible. So what they are now proposing, what they are now offering, is to install 3 new gas power plants. So energy being produced via fossil gas. The most radical movement within the climate movement in Belgium says neither nuclear energy nor gas power plants, and um, we need to save on energy via many means, which I named already. All situations in the different countries demands such solutions. So we need to struggle for renewables. We need to struggle for for better agriculture, for better transportation, and so on. And through these struggles, we could um, elaborate solutions for the climate justice movement. One of our goals in this climate movement is also to try and understand what material production on Earth should imply for us to have a good life. I think we would all agree here to say that we stand against the production of weapons. Weapons are not useful. They are being used to kill people. So we should be against the installation of weapons factories. This should be a part of the climate justice movement. In Belgium, we've got the FNR Stahl, which is a company, a factory building weapons and selling weapons. We should oppose them. What's more is that we should oppose the continued use of pesticides. In Europe, it's still being allowed. Despite all the laws which were voted, you still have important exceptions. For example, the production of sugar in Europe is not subjected to the pesticide ban. We need to ban all those dangerous pesticides. The other thing is that we need to reject the production of plastics, of plastic. Yeah. In the port of Antwerpen, in Belgium, there's a big factory, a big plan to store plastics. The climate movement in Belgium is not strong enough to oppose this for now, but this should be an integral part of our struggle. The fact that so much commodities, so much objects nowadays have um, a lifespan which is really short, this should also be opposed. Those objects, they should be replaced with objects that have a longer lifespan and that can be repaired. Think about mobile phones. The, think about the number of mobile phones that you yourself uh, have bought already. And think about the fact that nowadays you've got more mobile phones on Earth than humans. This is absurd. We've got many things which can improve the well-being of people and which do not increase the greenhouse gases emissions. Think about all the expenses that would be needed for a good health system. That's not, this would improve our well-being without having to increase the greenhouse gases emissions. Think about education and culture. This can be improved without increasing greenhouse gases emissions. There are many human needs which do not depend on CO2 production, CO2 emission, and we should favor them. We should also favor the development of well-being, of a decent um, um, life conditions in urban areas and so on. Think about urbanization. Think about the fact that many houses are being destroyed um, or not decent anymore. Or think about the fact that people live too far away from their workplace. All this, and also having houses which are well isolated and of good quality, this should be part of the climate justice movement and for the well-being of people.
And in the with the outlook of a less disrupted climate in a society where it's actually pleasant to live, that should be an important engine for the climate movement, because capitalists and the right in general insult us in the climate movement when they say that we are crazy, that we want to return to the Stone Age, or we want to heat ourselves with wood fires and light our houses with candles. This whole media propaganda campaign against the climate movement is really unacceptable. And there's also this idea that the climate movement seeks to limit our freedoms. And we have to stress that this is not the case. With a less endangered climate, with better public services, with higher quality air to breathe, our lives will become freer, not less free. When public transport is free and of good quality, when healthcare is free and of good quality, we'll see who continues to say these bad, harsh, inaccurate things about the climate movement. So we have to see our movement as something that is building something positive, and we have to make it clear who our enemies are. It's not the individualism or the selfishness of consumers. Rather, it's the economic structures that are focused on competition and profit. And this awareness can lead us to very thoroughgoing anti-capitalist awareness, consciousness, because anti-capitalism should be something that is a vital need for all of us. And that's what the possibility of building a movement for the climate and social justice depends on. And this is how we can get the workers' movement involved, because that is the workers' movement is of course remains quite absent from climate mobilizations. The workers' movement, those who work, those who sell their labor power to the system, are insufficiently organized in trade unions. If this workers' movement were to join the fight, join the mobilization, that would completely transform the relationship of forces in favor of the climate, in favor of saving the climate. So the working class, with a broad definition, young people, precariously employed workers, pensioners, salaried employees, those who don't own the means of production and who depend on the decisions of those who do make the decisions, who do own the property. The mobilization of these forces is how we can put things on the right track. I'm getting a little emotional here, but I do believe strongly that anti-capitalist movement that does not factor in as a central question the climate crisis, the climate disruption, is really doomed, is in a terrible impasse if we just have nothing to say about the deepening environmental catastrophe. And just to wrap up with a few sentences, let me say that we should have a human outlook, a global view of the planet. What does this mean? It means that human beings are living creatures and therefore are part of Earth's life, Earth living creatures of nature. And under capitalism especially, but even before, there was a kind of split between human society on the one hand and nature on the other, saying that somehow humans were separate and that our role, not only could we, but we had to dominate nature. Neither Marx and Engels in later years also saw that capitalism not only destroys human society, let's not forget the wars of the 20th century or the Afghan war, which is so-called just drawing down. We see how capitalism destroys the possibility of a happy human society, but it also destroys nature. And this is actually placing in jeopardy the very survival of millions of people on the planet. So it destroys both human society and nature. So what does all this mean? We can't struggle against these dangers without overthrowing the system. Without overthrowing the system, we can't save the climate. So all the green capitalists maybe are of goodwill, but they're not producing the results. And we have proof of this going back to the first Rio conference back in 1992. Nothing has changed. Nothing has been done because the logic of so-called economic realism and of growth and competition for profit still hold sway and prevent us from saving the climate. So we have to, through mobilization, build a new alliance between human beings and their natural environment, an alliance that understands the interaction between the two and understands that separating human society from nature is suicidal and will lead to a terrible tragedy. This new alliance should also draw up an alternative perspective to capitalism. That is eco-socialism. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the term eco-socialism, and I'm sure many of you have read things. But eco-socialism is based on what feminists used to call care. Like the paradigm or the example of care for humans also means care for nature. And having an attitude of protection and care for human beings and the relations between human beings and is at the heart of the eco-socialist project. It's not the money that it costs, but it's the usefulness of things that counts. When something is useful for well-being, it should be embraced. It's the use value of things, not the exchange value or profit that can be derived from production. And so if it's useful to create a natural space with waters and plants, that should be done. It should not be the real estate industry and real estate developers that make the final decision. So a new alliance between humans and their natural environment, and that means eco-socialism. That's a good place to stop. Thank you.